Amen, amen. Again, welcome this morning. Just by show of hands, who's ever gone to Splashway? Anybody gone to Splashway? Okay, a few of you are. I don't particularly like Splashway that much. I don't know what is it about water. I'm a repellent of water. That's why I don't bathe. No, just kidding. I just don't like the idea of water. Or I can maybe coast to the lazy river, and that's about it. But I remember this one year, several years ago now, maybe a decade ago, where I went with a friend of mine, and Marisa and I went as a couple date, and this friend of mine with his wife, and he was like, "Hey, I bet you can't do that big one, the tall one." And it's like what do you do when your friend, is this courageous guy, he's buffed, he's good looking, and he tells you, I bet you can't do it. Of course you have to do it. So there I go. A little Mr. Me going up there, and that big slide, I'm looking down, I'm thinking, oh no, I don't know if I'm going to make this. And but when you have a friend that's like, I know you can, you go ahead and do it. So I just took the plunge, I went through the slide, and then as I fell to the ground, there's this water, and I fell into it, that long slide. And I'm gasping for air. I'm screaming, save me now. And the teenager next to me was like, just stand up. So I stood up, and there's 4 feet of water, but there I was thinking I was drowning. That's why I don't like water. But that slippery slide, at first you feel the thrill. You're like, oh, I feel the thrill. Up until halfway, and you're like, I can't reverse this. This is going fast and furious, and I'm gonna land wherever it determines I land, which is in a puddle or big thing of water. The same can be said. The same can be said about sin. The same can be said. It starts small, but it quickly gets out of control. Very small, and then it's out of control. And the big idea this morning is this, that sin begins with small compromises that result in big consequences. It is small compromises that over time result in big consequences. Now, up to this point, we've been talking about King David. We saw how he was set apart by God to be the anointed future king. We saw him as a young shepherd boy. He wasn't even called to be in the lineup. And the prophet Samuel asks David's father, Jesse, do you have another son? He says, sure, he's out there in the field. He brings him, and Samuel anoints David as a teenager, likely a 15-year-old. And then he disappears, and David goes back to the field, and he does what shepherds do, takes care of the sheep. Along the way, he learns a couple of things. He learns how to master the sling. He learns how to fight a bear and a lion by the power of God. And then finally the day comes where the moment that we've all heard about, and we even use this expression, the Goliath moment. David against Goliath. I mean, we hear that expression in football, basketball, you name it. Just in life in general. This is a Goliath moment. And we saw how there's this young man now, and he sees this Philistine just making taunting words against the people of God, and he takes offense to that. And he takes offense to that because it's an affront to God, and so he responds back. It's like, I'll take him, His brothers think that he's being cocky, but he's not. He's trying to defend the name of God. But nobody else is standing up to say, I'll take him. And so he stands up and takes him. Do you remember the story? He tried the arsenal of the king Saul, and it didn't fit. It was just kind of weird on his body. And so he decides that he's going to go with his slingshot. He gets in front of the giant, Goliath, and he swings that sling, and he hits him, and he falls. And we saw that, and then we saw that he gets recruited into King Solomon's kingdom, or King Saul's, and he's recruited to be the musician, the worship leader there with King Saul, because King Saul is being dominated by demonic forces, and as he's dominated by demonic forces, only worship music seems to relieve him from the oppression of demons. And so David becomes the harpist. And we see a lot of his lyrics in the book of Psalms. And we saw his pull and influence there. And then later on, we saw how his best friend, Jonathan, gives him a forewarning. It says, hey, listen, dude, just his translation. Listen, dude, my dad wants to kill you. And he wants to kill you because if he doesn't kill you, you're going to be the next king. And you and I know that you ought to be the next king, but my dad wants me to be the king. So you got to run. And so run, Forrest, run. He runs. And we saw this little vignette of him coming to this priest's house. And he asks, is there any weapons here in your house? And the priest says, no. But we have one only. And unbeknownst to him, it is the sword of Goliath, the very sword he used to decapitate Goliath when he had won the battle. And so he is hidden in this home of a priest, and he thinks nobody saw him. But he didn't realize that King Saul had someone, a herdsman, that actually saw him enter into that house. And that herdsman throws everybody under the bus, and he goes to King Saul and says, I know where he's at, and I know who helped him. And so the priest comes before King Saul, and the king says, you're dead. Everybody's dead. So over 70 people, priests die, including their households, and one person survives. Is the son of the priest where David stayed. And that son goes to David and says, you're never going to believe this. Everybody is dead in the town, a town full of priests. And David, realizing that they're dead because he lied, just confesses to the son and just in an utter state of brokenness. And then we saw this little story of a lady by the name of Abigail. How still not king, how David now he's running from King Saul, him and his men, they want some help, and so they've been protecting this one land, and so they go to the land and they say, hey, can you help us with food, with grub, and can you help us with some essentials? And the guy responds with, I don't even know who you are. Insulting David, and David gets angry. He grabs the sword of Goliath, and he's going towards this guy. He's going to kill him. And then the wife, Abigail, comes up and says, no, wait a minute. He's a bozo, or literally a fool, which his name meant fool. The husband says, he's a fool. We're going to help you. And she takes a donkey full of stuff to feed over 100 people, over 100 of his men. And then her husband, Abigail's husband, has a heart attack. And he flops, and after a couple of days, he's dead. And David marries this Abigail. Wouldn't be the first wife, or the second wife, but anyway, I digress. He marries this Abigail because she sees beauty and wisdom and intelligence. And then last week, we saw how David is looking for someone to give grace to. Somebody from the household of Saul. Now he is king at this point, and they see and they find this crippled man that's the son of his best friend, who died also, Jonathan. And he brings this man into his table. What would have been considered an enemy. He says, you can have food from my table. I will provide for you anything you want, you will have. And so him and his household get provided for by King David. And we saw that in a lot of ways that connects us to the grace of God, how that's a foreshadow or shadow of what was yet to come, and that is that we get to eat in the table of Christ with other people that were once enemies, unworthy of mercy and grace, and that's what we saw. And today we're going to talk about probably the story that most of you have heard, the story that most of you are probably acquainted with. And it's a story that's going to warn us about sin's slippery slope and how to avoid the downfall spiral of sin. How to avoid the downward spiral of sin. Last night, as we were watching a movie, Twister, Marisa was actually, doing some of the decorations, some of the wrapping of gifts. And from the kitchen, he's like, can somebody do the trash? Somebody left, an open container in the trash. Now it's leaking. At this point, I was thinking, hey, I'm in a house full of women or girls. Marisa, Ziana, and Zoe. I'm like, I should be the last one to pick up that trash. I'm just saying. I was thinking, I'm not doing it. She said something leaking. That's not my game. Actually, it is my game. But anyway, after a while, I was like, okay, I got the trash. I picked it up. Now it's kind of heavy, and it was just leaking. Marisa doesn't know this, but it was actually ice cream that Zoe dropped in the trash can. But she doesn't know this. She's probably in the back helping with today's lunch. So wink, wink. It was actually Zoe. And afterwards, I told Zoe, it's like, you and I know who did it, right? It's like, yeah. But I didn't throw her under the bus yet. So I take this trash, it's leaking, and I take it outside. And my point is that taking out the trash comes early. Otherwise, it gets too heavy and messy. When you take out the trash, you do it quickly. Because if not, it's going to be way too heavy and way too messy. And that's like sin. That's like sin. If you don't pick up your sin, if you don't deal with your sin, it's going to get bigger and messier the further along you are from the time of committing the sin. So I want you to go to 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. Which I'm glad that Zoe wasn't here. She's 10 years old, by the way. She would have been mortified, bread and everything. That's okay. She needs to go through what my other 3 kids went through, which is a lot of stories about them. So go to 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1. We're going to navigate through this, get a couple of principles here of how to stop the downward spiral. And it says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. But David remained where? In Jerusalem. The spring is when you go to war because the weather is perfect for it. And in ancient times, if you're the king, you go with the army to war. You don't stay home. Traditionally, he would have been expected to be there with the army. And he stayed home instead when he should have been leading his army. And by doing this, he neglected his God-given role. This was the first step in his downfall. This is where we get our first principle, which is stay engaged in God's mission. Stay engaged in God's mission. When we disregard or disengage from our purpose, we become vulnerable to sin. See, David this is the guy who once had taken Goliath. As a teenager, as a 15-year-old, he had taken Goliath. Now he's a king, and he's staying home. And now he's coasting. That's what he's doing. He's just coasting, staying home, sleeping his day away, making him extremely vulnerable. And this really represents in David a turning point in his leadership. When we disengage from God's purpose, we leave gaps where sin can creep in. When we are not fulfilling or living out our purpose, there's a gap. If this is our purpose, our mission in life, your personal mission in life, and there's a gap between your fulfillment, where you're at, and the mission of God for you and for us as a church, this gap is an open gap for sin to creep in. How many of you have seen marriage relationships or careers fall apart because someone disengaged? Someone checked out of the relationship. therefore creating a gap. Oftentimes what we do is we let passivity be part of our way of life. And when we're passive, what we do is we invite destruction into life. Just talking here to men, I want to encourage you men. Your main role, your main mission in life, your personal mission, a mission that stands all the way through Genesis, is to lead, is to take responsibility, reject passivity, and lead your homes, your families, wherever you're at. But one can say that it's all of our mission. We got to engage fully in the battles God has called you to face, whether it's leading in your family, in ministry, or leading even yourself. And guess what, folks? A church, too, can lose its sense of mission. You see it all the time. You see it all the time. Churches becoming complacent. We're just kind of coasting. And as the church, as the people of God, we have a mission that goes past these 4 walls. Actually, we have 5 walls. These 5 walls. And that mission is making disciples. That's our mission. God has placed that mission in us. Therefore, go and make disciples. Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 through 20. Go, therefore, make disciples, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to what? Obey. Not just teaching, but teaching them to obey. We have the first class of disciple makers right now. This year, as an initiative by the elders, we were like, you know what? Let's get back in the game of making disciples at a personal level. And so we started this campaign. We didn't publicize it actually that much. It's going to get publicized this coming year because we wanted to develop people in the process. But a couple people said, I want to become a disciple maker. And we train these people, and for the most part, many of those people are leading groups. You have these groups led by men, like I led the first round, Kyle, Kenny, and Eric. And the second wave was Kenny, then going to Gene and Blake, and then they went to the other wave, Gene, then going to Jimmy and Jacob, and then Blake then going to Chris and Joseph. And then Kyle, our elder, just taking Jonathan and Christian. Joe Riojas taking somebody through a discipleship group. Allison Sevchi and Audra and B saying, hey, we want to lead a group. A group of 2 or 3 people being discipled to learn about what it means to follow Jesus. And once these 2 or 3 people get discipled, they are like, I want to disciple someone else. So don't be surprised if next year you get invited by someone saying, hey, I want to invite you to be part of my discipleship group. Because that's part of our mission. That's part of our purpose. To make disciples who will then in turn make other disciples. Let's continue in our text, 2 Samuel verse 11, verse 2 now. One evening, David got up from his bed. Where was he at? His bed. What day of time is it? It's evening. Evening time. David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very, very beautiful. Now, I want you to understand that the rooftop back then was a place of privacy. But unless you're the king, which you live up in the hill, you get to see people showering. And David's eyes lock into this beautiful woman that's showering. Now, the impression here is that Bathsheba wasn't trying to expose herself so she could be looked. She wasn't like, ooh, David, look at me. She wasn't doing any of that. David is the one that notices her showering. And David's eyes linger a little too long. A little too long. And it sets up the stage for the entry of sin. The second thing of how to stop the downward spiral of sin is guard your eyes and your mind. what you linger on shapes your desires. Whatever you spend most time in is the thing or the person that you're going to be focused on the most. Here, David was on the balcony. In our modern world, this could mean staying up late, scrolling through social media, knowing it might lead to inappropriate images or conversations. Small compromises leading to great falls. Small compromises with big consequences. And you know what, folks? Usually temptation starts really small. It's the second glance, an innocent conversation that goes a little bit from the innocent to much more when we allow it to linger. I want you to imagine planting a weed in your garden, for those of you who have gardens, and you let it grow. Over time, it tangles up all the flowers and the roses in your garden, and it chokes it out. It kills the stuff in there. Again, it starts small, but it grows quickly if it's unchecked. Some of us, we got to do some checks. Maybe as I started communicating this morning, God has already brought up the area you need to check, put in check. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: it is easier to avoid temptation than to resist it. It's way easier to avoid temptation than to resist it. By the way, there's a movie out that's about his story. He was a pastor, turned spy, turned assassin. Man, that sounds like a cool. Marisa I was looking at it's in the theaters right now. Marisa saw the title and she was like, wouldn't you want to be that? It's like, who says I'm not? You know, I'm just saying. Anyway, he lives during the Nazi Germany, and as a pastor, he tries to get into the inner circle of Hitler in order to do an assassination. Anyway, it's just a plug for that movie. My point is, avoid risky situations. Stay off the balcony. Temptations looks harmless, but it can leave scars. Go to verse 3. It says, David sent someone to find out about her. Uh-oh. He was just looking before. I was just scrolling. And the look turns into, I want that. Does it remind you of a couple centuries before, Adam and Eve? It just went from looking, I'm just going to look at the fruit. Oh, look at it. To let me partake of it. So we're seeing that David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, this is one of his servants, I love good friendships. Because listen to what this person says. He's there with David, with King David, and he says, she is Bathsheba. She's got a name, dude. She's got a name. Not only does she have a name, it's the daughter of Eliam. She's somebody's daughter. And the wife, somebody's wife, of Uriah the Hittite. So Bathsheba was not just beautiful, she was the daughter of someone, a trusted warrior. She was the wife of Uriah, part of David's mighty men, his circle of warriors. Which leads me to point number 3 in stopping the downward spiral of sin. Value people, don't dehumanize them. Value people, don't dehumanize them. You know what sin does? It dehumanizes others. Love restores their humanity. See, here David ignored her identity. And in addition, he ignored that she's a daughter of someone. And plus, he ignores that she is somebody's wife. And he made Bathsheba an object of his desire. There's no romance here. Oftentimes we see this story through the filter of romance. Because that makes us feel good. It's like, well, it's King David. Maybe it was a romantic deal. Maybe it was, on the side. Hey, they met each other. They're like, woo, let's go ahead and do it on the side. And boom, he got busted. It's not like that at all. At all. This is a story about the abuse of power. That's what the story is about. It's the abuse of power and taking something that's not yours. I heard a father once say about walking with his daughter down the aisle, I hope her husband will always see her as I do, not as an object, but as someone precious. And if you have daughters, I mean, that's one of your big things you want from your daughters, and you want to develop men or boys that will become men that will do likewise. Protect the spouses that they marry. But for that, you got to train your mind to see people as God's image bearers, not as objects to be used for personal gratification. I want you to think about the pain that Bathsheba would have gone through, the powerlessness that she's going to go through, betrayed by somebody she trusted, an authority figure, and reduced to nothing more than someone else's sin. This isn't a romantic thing. Matter of fact, we learn from the story that he won't see her after the fact, after he gets with her. He's not going to see her until months deep in. Why? Well, let's continue in verse 4. Then David sent messengers to get her. The get her here is not like, oh, he put out the roses on the bed. Oh, he sent me some flowers at work. He took advantage of her. I know it's hard to see King David as somebody who's taking advantage of someone, but that's the story of a man who's following after God's own heart. He's not perfect. He's not perfect. He stands as a figure pointing to the future perfect king, the righteous king, Jesus. So he gets this messenger to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. It's not, oh, they slept together. Oh, how magical. No, he slept with her. Now, kings in ancient Israel had near absolute power, and Bathsheba probably felt she had no choice. This is sexual abuse, by the way. Which leads us to point number 4, which is use influence to help, not to take advantage. Use influence to help, not to take advantage. Godly leadership serves others. Sinful leadership takes advantage of them. Who are you serving? Or are you serving or taking advantage? Because David took advantage. Later on, the next chapter, actually, Nathan, the prophet of the time, is going to go up to David because David lives his life all confused. He doesn't even see that what he's done so far is wrong. And what he's going to do, which is going to lead to this confrontation of the prophet Nathan to him, is going to be, he's going to do a couple of things that are unsavory, but which I'll talk about in just a second. But Nathan will expose David for what he is or what he did, and he will liken David to a thief stealing a poor man's lamb. And oftentimes that's what we do. We justify the little things. It's just a small thing. It's just a little thing. Just like the parable that Nathan is going to use in the next chapter, a little lamb. See, leaders have to use their influence to protect and to serve. We have to use our leadership as a church to protect and serve. You have to use your place of influence, not to take advantage, but to protect and serve. I mean, how many times have we seen these workplace scandals? Or how many times have we experienced the political scandals? That's normal in our culture today. It happens in both, red and blue. It happens in both. A lot of taking advantage of positions to leverage it for your own benefit. That's what we see. So clean the swamp. Ask yourselves, am I using my influence to protect others or to serve myself? In verse 26, fast forward to verse 26, Bathsheba is going to hear something that's going to just crush her heart. She hears of how David, when he found out that Bathsheba is pregnant, Bathsheba goes to David and says, I'm pregnant, but her husband is out in battle. And David says, okay, let me do a cover-up here. And he calls Uriah to come to the palace. And he gets him drunk. Because then he wants to tell him, go back to your home. Have sex with your wife. Why? He wants to do a cover-up. Oh, that's his child. But he's so faithful to the king that he says, no, I'm not going to do that. Not as long as my friends are in battle. How can I go and have sex with my wife when my friends are in battle? I won't do that. I am going to stay here. And so David gets even more drunk, and he won't go. So finally David says, you know what? I'm going to put you into battle like you want. So he puts him in the battle, but he doesn't just put him into battle. He puts him in the front line so that he could die quickly. And he dies. And the response of Bathsheba is, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. It's like, it's my husband. See, David's sin led to deaths of Uriah and other innocent men as well who got killed, unraveling his family and the kingdom. Nathan's prophecy in the next chapter would talk about how the kingdom that he's leading would just unhinge. It would just unhinge. And it would unhinge. And that's why it's really important for us to confess and seek forgiveness immediately. Immediately. Immediately, before the small consequences turn into big consequences. Before the little sin turns into uncontrollable, unmanageable consequences of it. Because the longer you hide your sin, the worse the consequences. It gets worse. David's sin caused a generation of drama. One of his sons, Amnon, assaulted his own sister, Tamar. Had his way with her, raped her. And then later, it's like, don't get near me, whatever. He was so infatuated with her, but then it was like, whatever. Her brother gets angry, and so he goes after him to kill him. Absalom, one of his sons, tall and handsome, is a political genius. He's kind of weaving behind the scenes to rebel against his dad. But then he goes and has sexual intimacy with his dad's wife. Sin rarely affects only one person. You know, in seminary, back when I was in it, back in 2001 to 2006, I had this one professor that he always was an advocate for writing down the consequences. I remember one class where he said, guys, gentlemen, it was mostly men. Now it's changed a lot, which I'm glad. But it was like, man, you need to write the consequences of what would happen if you did this. And he took out his list, and it was in a wallet. It was all crumpled up. He says, this is what I remind myself daily, so I don't sin. These are the consequences. That's the thing. We got to recognize there's long-term consequences. So that's why we got to repent quickly and ask for forgiveness. In 1 John 1:9, it says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins. Because you know what? Carrying sins is really exhausting, folks. It's really exhausting. Confessing might feel humiliating, but it's the first step towards freedom and the first step towards healing. Now, you don't have to share with everybody about everything. Just share it to somebody. That's how it loses power. So I'm not saying, man, here's the mic, tell us all. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you want the release of power of that hidden sin over your life, you got to say to someone. Preferably somebody who's going to remind you that you are loved by the King of Glory. That you are loved and forgiven That's who you want to share it with. Not somebody that's like, I'm putting social media now. Oh, everybody's going to know now. A child who breaks a vase may try to hide it, but the cracks are always found. And sin works the same way. The cracks always show. As a matter of fact, the cracks eventually become part of your story. Your cracks eventually become part of God's glory. Your cracks is what you in the future would be like, I'm a broken vessel that God still uses. And yeah, that's part of my story. I'm not proud of it, but God used that story for me to be where I'm at now, mature and more maturing. The scars become the story of God in your life. In verse 27, it says, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. And with this, the hopes of Israel were crushed, because they had heard the promise of 2 Samuel chapter 7, where God says there's going to be an everlasting kingdom. And for us, it's the idea of if a man after God's own heart could fall, where would they place their trust? How can we even have confidence in our flesh even? This looks towards the future, for them, future Jesus that is yet to come, the righteous King of glory. For us, we look back to when Jesus came, died, and resurrected, being crowned as the King of righteous glory. Which leads me to the last point, which is Jesus is the King we long for. He's the King we long for. When another political figure does something that is like, it reminds us that we're looking for the perfect leader who's yet to come back again to establish his kingdom here on earth. When somebody fails morally, it's not so that we can tap ourselves in the back and be like, whoa, I'm doing good. It's so that we can be reminded that we're looking forward to the King of glory. Earthly leaders will disappoint. That's why we seek the one that never disappoints, that doesn't take advantage. Unlike David, Jesus never abuses his power. As a matter of fact, he laid down his life for us willingly. Bathsheba's husband Uriah went to his death, not knowing of David's betrayal. Jesus went to the cross fully aware of ours. But this is the thing about, the way sin works in our life. Our problem is not that our cravings for sin are too strong, is that our passion for God is too weak. It's not that sin has this dominance over us, it's that our passion for God is too weak. According to Thomas Chalmers, which was actually a Puritan theologian, and he's talking about in one of his books that your love for Jesus or your affections for Jesus has got to be so strong that it exposes or pushes out the power of sin. This is the bottom line, the power of a new affection to push out the old affection. Athletes do it all the time. They push down lesser desires for the greater desire of winning the crown. And for us, it's just saying, you know what? There's this desire that is not healthy, not beneficial, that it's sinful. How do you squelch it? Become even more radically in love with Jesus. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Become more affectionate for him. Paul put it this way, and we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image. The gospel is not go and become, it's come and uphold. Come and behold. Behold the beauty of Jesus. His glory, how beautiful he is and how beautiful he's been in your life. Fix your eyes on him, the author and the perfecter of your faith. But the choice is yours. If you had a fork in the road, you get to choose. One path leads to destruction. The other one leads to spiritual growth, to life. Which one are you going to choose?